It was supposed to be a routine traffic stop on a quiet afternoon. A white police officer, confident in his authority, pulls over a sleek black SUV for what seems like a minor violation. But as he approaches the vehicle, the situation takes a turn he never expected. Behind the wheel sits a black man, calm and composed. But this isn't just any man. He's a highly decorated general in the United States Army. A man who has dedicated his entire life to serving the very country this officer swore to protect. At first, the officer doesn't recognize him. His tone is firm, his approach aggressive, following every procedure he's been taught. But something feels off. The general remains respectful, but his steady gaze carries the weight of authority and experience. The officer pushes forward, unaware that his actions are about to spiral into a moment he will regret forever. In a split second, the balance of power shifts. The officer's badge suddenly feels much smaller in the presence of a man who commands thousands. What happens next will not only challenge the officer's judgment, but also spark a conversation much bigger than this single encounter. Stay tuned, because this is a story that will leave you questioning everything about respect, authority, and the power of perception. The officer's grip on his flashlight tightens as he leans closer to the driver's window. His voice sharpens, asking for license and registration. The man in the driver's seat, dressed casually but with an undeniable air of authority, calmly hands over his documents. The officer glances at the name on the ID, General Marcus Bennett. The title doesn't register right away. To him, it's just another name on a license. But General Bennett's steady expression doesn't waver. He's been in far more dangerous situations than this. Yet something about this moment feels heavier than it should. The officer steps back to run the information, still oblivious to who he's dealing with. Behind the scenes, Bennett's military career is nothing short of remarkable. Years of service, multiple deployments, and countless commendations have shaped him into a leader of men and a protector of freedom. Yet here he is, pulled over and treated with suspicion in his own country. The weight of that reality hangs in the air. Meanwhile, the officer begins to notice the name on the ID feels familiar. A flicker of doubt creeps in. Could this really be the same general he's seen in news reports, shaking hands with presidents and leading troops overseas? The air grows tense, and the officer's confidence starts to crack. The officer lingers by his patrol car, staring at the screen as General Bennett's name pulls up more than just a driver's record. A quick search reveals news articles, photos of Bennett in full uniform, receiving medals, standing beside top military leaders. The realization starts to sink in, but pride and procedure blur the officer's judgment. He tells himself it doesn't matter who the man is. No one is above the law. Yet a quiet voice in the back of his mind questions if this situation is unfolding the way it should. Back in the SUV, General Bennett waits, his hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. His patience isn't out of fear but experience. He knows the delicate balance in these moments. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and everything could escalate. He thinks about his family at home, the soldiers he commands, and the countless times he's spoken about justice and equality. Now he's caught in a moment that tests those very beliefs. Passers-by begin to slow down, curious about the scene. A few drivers pull out their phones, recording from a distance. The officer feels the weight of their eyes and the silent judgment in their stares. His training tells him to stay in control, but this isn't just a traffic stop anymore. The air is thick with tension, and neither man knows which way this encounter will turn. The officer takes a deep breath, gripping his radio as if it could steady his nerves. Doubt creeps in, but he pushes it aside. He calls for backup, his voice steady but tight. Maybe it's protocol, or maybe it's something else. a need to reassert control over a situation slipping through his fingers. General Bennett watches the officer carefully, noticing the subtle shift in his body language. Backup? For what? Bennett hasn't raised his voice, hasn't made a move. Yet the flashing lights of another patrol car soon cut through the fading daylight, casting long shadows across the road. Two more officers step out, hands resting near their holstered weapons, scanning the scene with practiced suspicion. Bennett's jaw tightens. This is no longer about a traffic violation. This is about perception, authority, and the unspoken fears that drive decisions. He considers reaching for his military ID, the one that unmistakably identifies him as a high-ranking officer. But he hesitates. Would that de-escalate the situation, or make it worse? The original officer approaches again, his face unreadable. The silence is suffocating, broken only by the hum of idling engines and the distant click of a recording phone. Every second stretches longer, the line between authority and overreach blurring. Then the officer slowly reaches for his handcuffs. The officer's hand hovers over his cuffs, the cold metal glinting under the flashing red and blue lights. General Bennett stays perfectly still, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Before the officer can speak, a sharp voice crackles through his radio. Unit 23, stand down immediately. Do you know who you've got? The officer freezes. The voice belongs to the precinct captain, someone who doesn't usually interfere with routine stops. Confused, the officer steps back, bringing the radio closer to his ear. That man is General Marcus Bennett. You're about to make a career-ending mistake. Stand down. The words hit hard, but before the officer can react, one of the newly arrived backup officers stiffens. His eyes are locked on General Bennett, but not with suspicion, more like recognition. Sir, General Bennett. The second officer blurts out, his tone shifting from authority to disbelief. Bennett's gaze doesn't soften. Yes, and I suggest you get your colleague under control. But before anyone can move, a black SUV with tinted windows pulls up fast, stopping abruptly. Two men in dark suits step out, scanning the scene. Secret Service. The officer stumbles back, completely blindsided. One agent flashes a badge. General Bennett, we need to move. Now, the officer's stomach drops. This wasn't just a routine stop. Whatever was happening was far bigger than any of them realized. The air turns electric as the Secret Service agents move swiftly toward General Bennett. One agent leans in, speaking low but urgently. Sir, there's been a security breach. We need to escort you to a secure location immediately. The officer stares, stunned. A security breach. He thought this was just a traffic stop, but now it feels like something out of a movie. He watches helplessly as the agents guide Bennett toward the black SUV. Before getting in, Bennett pauses and turns back to the officer. You should think carefully about how you treat people. One day, it might cost you more than your badge. The words hit like a hammer. The officer's face burns with regret, but before he can respond, Bennett disappears into the vehicle, and it speeds away. Relief barely has time to settle when the officer's radio crackles again. All units be advised. The security breach is closer than we thought. Suspect is possibly disguised as law enforcement. Proceed with caution. The officer's blood runs cold. Slowly, he turns to look at the two backup officers. One of them, the one who recognized Bennett, has vanished. The realization sinks in. The real threat wasn't General Bennett. It was standing right beside him the whole time. Panic ripples through the officer as he scans the area, realizing the other officer is gone without a trace. How could he have missed the signs? The traffic stop, the call for backup, it was all carefully orchestrated. The officer's hands tremble as he grips his radio. This is Unit 23. We have a possible imposter disguised as law enforcement. Officer missing. Request immediate support. But it's too late. The imposter is already gone, and so is any chance of stopping whatever threat was in motion. The officer watches the fading taillights of General Bennett's vehicle, knowing the general is now racing against an invisible enemy. In the aftermath, the officer sits quietly at his desk, paperwork scattered in front of him. His actions that day are under review, but it's not the disciplinary reports that weigh on him. It's the hard truth about judgment and perception. He misjudged a man who had spent his life protecting the country, while a real threat stood beside him unnoticed. Sometimes the real danger isn't obvious, and authority doesn't always mean control. The officer leans back, staring at his badge. It once symbolized power. Now it's a reminder that respect, awareness, and responsibility must go hand in hand, and that some mistakes can't be undone.